If I don't get out right now, he's going to kill me. You either get out or that's it, right? It's over for you.
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Struggle. It is me, Ryan. I am your host, and you are the listener, and those are our roles in this podcast relationship right here. And actually, relationship's a good word, because we're going to be talking about relationships a lot in this episode here with Fallon Rowe. Fallon cracked open her heart and her mind to talk about this chapter of her life that was really, really traumatic. Well, actually, it was all the emotions. It was charismatic and exciting and adventurous and terrifying and horrific and abusive. And then ultimately, there was freedom and rebirth and joy. And it's really just such a roller coaster of emotions that Fallon takes us on in this conversation here today, which she shares in much more incredible detail in a book that she wrote that's just about to come out. It's called Pay No Mind. It's from D'Angelo Publications. I got myself an advanced copy. I read it cover to cover, and it was absolutely gripping. And I don't have any personal experience with abusive relationships, although I know people who have been in them and gotten out of them, and I know how traumatic and awful that can be, and also, unfortunately, how common that can be. And so this episode is a bit different than what we would typically talk about here on The Struggle, whether it was a typical kind of pro athlete interview or a Weekend Warrior episode where we're talking a lot about performance and training. We're talking much more about the personal side of climbing here and beyond climbing, just relationships in general. And while the subject matter may be a little bit difficult, and certainly be warned if this is something that you could find to be emotionally stressful or triggering, we do talk about abuse and controlling relationships in this, but we also talk about how one can get out of those situations, and for those of us who may not be in that situation directly, how we can help to recognize when others are, when we're at the crag, when we're at a restaurant, just as humans, as humans of this world. I think this is really, really important subject matter, and I really encourage you to listen through this entire episode and share it with everybody in your life, because it could help to save a life. And I don't say that lightly. I really, really believe this is true. And also, Fallon is an incredible storyteller, and she obviously was recognized for that by getting this book published, and that's going to be hitting shelves very, very soon. And I'll put a link in the show notes where you can pre-order it to support Fallon and also support the independent publisher that she's working with. But also, she brings a lot of that storytelling skills to this podcast here. And so I found it to be an incredibly gripping conversation from start to finish, and ultimately a very inspiring and joyful conversation, because, spoiler alert, Fallon got out of this terrible situation and is now doing awesome. So we do talk about her climbing and her coaching and other things towards the tail end of this conversation. But the whole thing really is a journey worth taking. And I am presenting this episode completely ad-free for everybody, because I just don't feel like it should be broken up. I feel like it should just be given the respect that it deserves. So enjoy this full episode here without any interruption. And then on the back end, I'll pop back in to talk a little bit more about what's going on in my life and climbing and, any number of other things. But let's just go ahead and get into things right now with Fallon Rowe. Okay, so I was just sending a quick message to my wife to limit use of the sink, because in my podcast/utility closet here, all the pipes from the house come through here. And so whenever anybody flushes the toilet or, washes dishes or whatever, it just sounds like a waterfall coming through the podcast closet.
Amazing. It'll just be like a stream in the background.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it'll sound like we're chatting in the forest, which is nice, but it's really just all the pipes that are hanging behind this blanket behind my head. Okay. I think we're good. Levels look good. We look good. We don't feel good, but we sound good. And that's all that matters for a podcast.
True. yeah, I'll see how the lungs handle it today.
Well, I'm so excited to meet you. I'm really happy to get to know you now personally after reading your book. And I want to start by congratulating you on this book. I'm sure it was an incredibly challenging and ultimately maybe cathartic process to put these words to paper over the years that you've been working on it. And now it's done. You have a book that you can hold. How does that feel?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a heck of a process, and I'm so grateful that everything has been working out this year after years of thinking about it and then writing it and querying, trying to find a publisher, and then going through this whole process this year with revision and promotion and getting ready for the release in November. It's just been this wild journey I never would have expected, and I just feel really, really grateful that it's finally going to be out in the world after putting all this effort into it. So thanks for all the kind words and for taking the time to read it. It's not an easy story to get through, as you know. So anyone who takes the time and does the emotional work of sitting with that kind of content, I really appreciate that.
It is a heavy read at times, and it's also, I think, a very exciting read at times, and there's a an emotional catharsis to it as well. I mean, it just kind of was, it's like the full enchilada of an experience. It's certainly not one's typical climbing, book where it's just like, oh, we're going to go climb a thing and it was hard and then we did it. I mean, there's some climbing in there, but it's really about this personal journey that you were on and this abusive relationship as kind of the through line. And probably better for you to maybe give a bit of an overview of it for the listening audience, if you wouldn't mind. And then I've got a lot of notes here that I want to just dive into different aspects. And to be perfectly honest, I don't exactly know where to start this conversation because it isn't the easiest subject matter to explore, but I find it so important to explore for people who are listening right now. And maybe it'll help if you just kind of give just a little bit of an overview of what one is to expect when they crack open this book.
Yeah, of course. So this book is my first book. It's a memoir. It's called Pay No Mind, which is a nod to the saying where, you kind of ignore something. And also I wanted something in the title to kind of reference mental illness in some way. So having the word mind in it seemed fitting. And, it's interesting when you're naming a project, you have to choose something that's not already taken. And I was surprised when I was coming up with titles. I was like, every title I wanted to use was already taken. So it took a long time to come up with the title. But yeah, so I'm 28 years old now, but this book happened when I was 19 years old. This era of my life where I was a college student. I was this overachiever, college athlete, geology student. And I met this guy who totally changed my life. I ended up breaking up with my long-term boyfriend to date this guy, and he was very charming, very charismatic. He kind of seemed like my ticket to learning how to become a more competent trad climber at the time, which was one of my big goals back then. And I was very young and impressionable and taken with this guy. And we ended up basically going on this expedition to Patagonia where everything went wrong. And it was quite haunting. And he was really struggling with mental illness, specifically bipolar disorder and addiction. And those things that he was struggling with ended up really impacting me and his behavior towards me, unfortunately. And once we got back to the United States, there's this period of time, these months where I was kind of like under his control in a lot of ways and dealing with the fallout of his mental illness. And so the book kind of follows this whole arc of what my life was like before him and how I met him, going on this expedition and then coming home, and then how I finally was able to escape him because he was so controlling. So it follows the relationship, certainly, but it's also kind of a coming-of-age story about me, like, trying to find myself and figure out what's important to me and who I am as a rock climber and as a person. And also, it's when a lot of my chronic illness issues were starting, so there's this kind of mystery component in the last part of the book in particular where I was kind of grappling with my body seemingly crumbling, and I couldn't figure out why. So it kind of explored a lot of these different things. But I wanted to write a book that was really explicit in describing the abuse, not to like haunt people, of course, because when you go into that much detail, it is quite terrifying, I think, to read. But I wanted people to understand what it's like to be stuck in a situation like that. So in order to do that justice, I felt the need to make it really thorough and detailed to help people like be in my shoes and understand the position that I was in.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think that was a really nice way to set everything up. And as the reader, I really did feel like I was in that situation with you, as you know, just kind of there and experiencing it and riding that emotional roller coaster that this man predominantly was, kind of putting you through. And in the book, you refer to him as Dan. I think that's not his real name, right? But it's a name that you chose to protect the identity, and you've done that with some other names, which is of course very typical for memoirs. And so, for purposes of this conversation, we'll just continue to call him Dan, who was this climber, who was quite a bit older than you.
Yeah, I was 19 at the time, and he was 25, and then I turned 20 during the relationship. So not the hugest age gap, but there was definitely a bit of a power dynamic because of that.
Yeah, I guess maybe it just felt older, and I think you nailed it right there, because it's, 5-6 years isn't that many years in the scheme of things, but when you're a teenager, when you first met and got into the relationship, and just also kind of the experience level of climbing and being, kind of a dirtbag traveler, and that like you were entering his world essentially. And so I want to explore a little bit just of your early climbing and how this started, because it may just be that people who are listening to this, there may be somebody out there who has experienced this, is experiencing it, or might at some point in time. And we've also been seeing just in the climbing world some predatory behavior by some male climbers that's been coming to light, and maybe there's more to come. Maybe there's a kind of a reckoning that's happening, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on all of that. We can explore some of that as we go along here. But if you could take a moment to kind of set things up as a 19-year-old, you're a high achiever, part of a high achieving family, and working really hard at school on scholarship, and then all of a sudden really got kind of swept up into this excitement of climbing and going to Patagonia, which seems completely understandable because climbing is freaking exciting and Patagonia is like the coolest.
Totally.
But, yeah, you also had so many other things going on. So can you just kind of talk a little bit about kind of maybe even pre-Dan, just, what it was about climbing that really got you psyched, and then how that ended up essentially dovetailing into this next chapter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started climbing in 2003 and started competing in 2004. So my entire youth career was mostly focused on indoor competitions. I did not come from a family that climbs, so I didn't really climb outside much when I was a kid. The outdoor climbing came more once I was in high school and I could drive and go out with my climbing buddies from my team and everything. And then it really started to take off more in college. I had more opportunities to climb outside when I moved to Utah. But my entire childhood was so focused on climbing. It was always kind of like my safe place, and I knew everybody at the gym. I knew the community would be like a safe, supportive space for me. And I don't know what it was about climbing specifically, but like I was horrible at other sports. Like PE, I was the kid in the back, like hyperventilating, like on a 15-minute mile, like complaining about my ankles hurting with my face like beet red, I was not a good athlete as a kid. But for some reason, I was really pretty good at rock climbing. And so it was an interesting way for me to like have this athletic endeavor that I really enjoyed, and I felt like a part of a community, and like I could always problem solve and excel. So I really got attached to climbing as a kid just right away. I knew I'd be a lifer. And by the time I got to college, I was just so eager to expand my skill sets beyond my competition background. And I wanted to kind of prove myself. And I felt this drive to become a more competent trad climber, because that really seemed like the next step for me. In high school, I had done a bunch of the state high points. And so I'd done some kind of, not anything super technical, but some mountaineering, like glacier mountaineering, a little bit alpine climbing. I'd dabbled, and this guy, Dan, kind of gave me this opportunity to expand my trad climbing skill set and go alpine climb in Patagonia. So it just seemed like this golden ticket to being able to progress. And he believed in me. He made me feel like I had all the skills that I needed, which now looking back, I would definitely caution someone in that position to be more realistic about things. But when someone believes in you that strongly and they're that charismatic, it can be very convincing. So that's kind of the position I was in, was feeling stifled by school and just full of psych and wanting to go climb all the time. And then he kind of gave me this little bit of freedom.
Kind of, you chose that freedom, right? So you like worked, I mean, you gave yourself like no time to basically try to scrape together some money and bust off to Patagonia. And this was at the time where things in the relationship were quite like fun and intoxicating and exciting. And it really seemed like once you got to Patagonia, or even traveling to Patagonia, like where he was like smuggling drugs to, I mean, it was marijuana, but like he was like kind of like smuggling marijuana in various ways to get down there and all that, things that made you uncomfortable that he just continued to do anyway. And then when you got down to Patagonia and the conditions weren't as good, and of course he wasn't able to do things that he wanted to do, like that's really when you started to see this other side, like the more controlling and angry side.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I had seen like a very small side of it prior to leaving that made me a little bit concerned, but I kind of buried those concerns before we left because I had this idea of being like a committed climbing partner and not bailing on someone. And I was just young and naive and believed what I wanted to. And when we got down there, I think it was actually like, yeah, it was the first full day. You know, that evening he had kind of like his first real meltdown that was directed at me, as you read. And that was a huge turning point because it was like, oh my gosh, this is the first day of this huge international expedition. It was my first time out of the country. You know, Patagonia is basically like the end of the world down there at the southern tip of South America. And I was so out of my element and reliant on him. And then to have him turn on me within the first day was really challenging. I definitely set the stage for a really rowdy expedition after that, you know.
I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, just that you've made this commitment now to be down on this expedition, and others might be able to relate to this, whether it's with a romantic partner or just a climbing partner, where essentially you're like, you know, you've made this commitment to go and do a thing, and now you're at the thing and it's not going the way you want it to. The personalities are clashing. The weather might not be cooperating, or somebody might not be performing the way they want to. And it can get really tense, but then you've got this like double relationship. There's a rope relationship, and then there's a personal relationship. And where was that line with you and Dan, and how did that line change like over the course of this trip?
Ooh, that's interesting to think about. Yeah, I think especially at the beginning, they were really tied together. You know, our climbing partnership basically was our relationship because that's all we did together, essentially, was talk about climbing, watch climbing videos, go climbing. And then when we were in Patagonia, it started to divide a little bit because when you're in the mountains, there's not a lot of time to be talking about those interpersonal things and romance and stuff. It's just focusing on the goal, doing a gear carry, getting up whatever section of the mountain you're trying to get up, talking about conditions and so on. And when we were down there, so many things went wrong that it didn't really even become a climbing expedition. You know, we didn't end up doing any climbing. And so it was kind of just this really demented relationship where he ended up being really controlling because I didn't have enough time to make money before the trip. I ended up becoming financially reliant on him. And he kind of used that to manipulate me and say, well, if I'm going to pay for you to exist here, basically, then you have to be able to support all of my decisions and basically be, you know, whatever his whims were, I had to go along with it, essentially. And so it made me feel like this like secondary person. And at one point he called me like his climbing slave, as you read about and as people will read, which was really strange to be there and feel so stuck. Like once I had already tried to leave while we were down there and he forced me to stay, it was a really odd position to be in as a climbing partner and romantic partner. I did not know how to make sense of that. I don't know if anyone's ever even been in that position before. You know, it was very bizarre. And then after we got back from the expedition, our relationship, I think, really had a big divide. You know, beforehand, it had been kind of like the romantic relationship and the climbing partnership were one and the same. And once we got back, they were very different. We were able to still enjoy our climbing partnership to a great extent, but not the romantic relationship. It was very, very rocky. And by the end, the climbing partnership crumbled too because he would, you know, put me down and it became very negative as well. But yeah, it was a really strange evolution to look at, definitely.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of the financial control there, and that was some of these like, I don't know if they're considered warning signs or controlling devices. This is not my area of expertise, so I apologize for my ignorance as I'm trying to make sense of this this trauma that you experienced and that others so sadly are experiencing. But when we're talking about this kind of abusive, controlling type of relationship, there's an imbalance of power. It sounds like that, starts to occur. And then there's these ways that the person, the controlling person, will use to try to keep somebody kind of there, right? Like, quote unquote, in their place. And financial dependence is one of them. There's some, kind of emotional dependence. There's putting people down, making them think they're worthless. There's threatening suicide if somebody leaves. I mean, these are all, he kind of had a pretty big bag of these tricks, if you will, or tools that he would dip into. And when you're in it, like you were in it early on there, like what is that experience like when you can feel some of these manipulations happening? And like, are you aware of it? Are you aware that you're essentially being controlled or manipulated in a way, or does it take hindsight to have the clarity of what was happening in the moment?
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. And I think it's kind of both, especially back then. I was quite young and I had never experienced anything like this before. And I knew about it intellectually, what domestic violence was, what an abusive relationship was. But being able to, experience it firsthand and take a step back and look at it almost from like a third person perspective is much more challenging. You don't want to believe that you're susceptible to someone's manipulation or gaslighting or control. And so when I was in it, I think I was in denial at first, but then as soon as things escalated and I became the target of his attacks, it would be undeniable, right? Like, there's no way I could have lied to myself and thought that it wasn't anything but what it was. It was just so blunt and so obvious what was happening. But you become like this shell of a person. You're in survival mode, and it becomes very challenging to escape, because I kind of explore this central dilemma in the book, but you end up in this position where you either can choose the passive option of staying and continue to be subjected to their unpredictability and their control and negativity and everything else, which is a little bit more, it feels safer in the moment, or you can try to escape and then you risk them hunting you down and whatever the consequences of that are going to be. And that feels like a much more active decision. And so breaking the cycle of abuse and actually getting out is very difficult to do, especially without external help. And so it took me a very long time to be able to achieve that. And so the book talks a lot about that, how I kept getting caught in this cycle and I kept facing this dilemma over and over again, where I felt damned if I do, damned if I don't. Basically, if I stay or if I leave, either way, it's not going to turn out well for me. And so you feel like you just have to do whatever it takes to keep yourself safe, even if that means kind of going along with the terrible things that they're telling you to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think you did a really good job in the book of kind of taking us through that journey, right? It's not just like, oh, things got bad and I got out. It's this kind of ever-flowing, like almost whipsaw of you would maybe go back to school for a bit and have some clarity and feel like the release or the kind of the freedom from the grips of that, but then it would pull you back in, or even towards the end of the relationship where you finally did kind of get out of it. You guys broke up and you changed your status on Facebook and all of this. But then there was, if I'm recalling correctly, it was like this moment where your health, you were struggling with health issues and you were by yourself and maybe just a little bit emotionally vulnerable. And he reached out at that time. And that was just like the little crack in the door that he needed to kind of come back in. And so like, even when you think you're out, maybe you're not fully out. And so for people who haven't read the book, maybe people who haven't experienced any of this, maybe one of the knee-jerk reactions is just when they hear of something like this, it's just like, well, but why don't you just like get away? Just like, block the phone number and like go stay with friends, or, just change your number altogether. Just go to the police. Which again, for somebody like myself, where I haven't experienced this directly, like all sound like logical things to say, but you've experienced this, and in reading the book, I kind of felt like I experienced it with you. And it's not that simple.
Definitely. Yeah. It feels like in hindsight, I could just yell at myself while I was writing and say, get out now before things get even worse, you know? But when you're in it, it's not quite that easy. And there are so many different ways that they're controlling you as well. These characters tend to follow a lot of the same scripts and use the same tools. Like you mentioned earlier, he had a bag full of different manipulative tactics, essentially. Whether those were conscious or not on his part, he certainly had them and used them. And one of the main ones that he used is the suicide thing, right? Like, if you leave me, I'll kill myself kind of thing, which you want to be able to think logically, like, well, that's not my responsibility, right? When someone's struggling, if they've been hurting you, you know, you can't let yourself, you know, just stay because of that. But if you're a decent person, it's really hard to just say, well, that's your problem and then leave. You know what I mean? So when someone uses that to manipulate you, it really makes you feel forced to stay so that you can help them. You don't want to leave someone behind who's in that position. And so that was one of the main ways that he got me to stay, even if it was under the guise of, well, you're just doing this as a friend, like we're not dating right now, but you should stay to help me so I can get through the night so I don't kill myself, basically, which is a really dark way to control someone. And it makes it really challenging to write about. And this is something I tried to be very careful about in the way that I discuss Dan in the book, is not to villainize mental illness, because he was really struggling and people can be going through those things and they need help. But the way that he weaponized it against me was unacceptable, frankly, and inexcusable. It explains some of his behavior, but it's not an excuse for his behavior. And I'm trying to remember, what was the original question? Sorry, I got off on this tangent.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, you answered it. It's just essentially, you know, from the outside, somebody might just say, well, just get out. But to your point, he had this bag of manipulations that even if you did get out, like you wrote about, he found a way to pull you back in.
Right, yeah. I think one of the other big things, too, was at the time I was under this impression that he was my only way to really focus on rock climbing, which now seems silly to me because I have this abundance of partners and places I can go and, you know, opportunities to rock climb. But back then I didn't really know a lot of people in that space, and social media wasn't quite as big as it is now. And it was a little bit harder to network, and I was still kind of learning. And so he felt like my ticket to climb, and my own addiction to climbing played a huge role in this. As you saw in the book, I went back to him willingly multiple times because of rock climbing and because of the opportunities to climb, which is totally on me, right? I could have said no to those invites, basically. So it was really interesting how that would happen. You know, you'd kind of go through this like honeymoon phase where things were better for a while, and then I'd get a text like, oh, do you want to go climb in Zion for the weekend? And that was very enticing, even with the risk of possible fights or abuse happening. I wanted that climbing experience so badly that I would say yes and go climb, and then things would inevitably kind of deteriorate and fall out and end with these really haunting, you know, evenings typically, or nights where things went really wrong. So it was weird that I kept deluding myself into continuing to climb with him and go on these trips when every single time it ended the same way.
Yeah, I wonder if we could explore that for a second, because I'd like to try to separate out the personal relationship with the climbing just for a second. And if you're able to look back at that period, what was your relationship with climbing separate from Dan like during that time? And was it enjoyable and, you know, the exciting challenge and the progression? Obviously you were passionate about it, but it was like so tinged by almost entirely your relationship with climbing kind of overlapped with your relationship with Dan at this time. Are you able to look back on your climbing during that time with any sort of fondness?
Yeah, definitely. You know, especially at the beginning of the relationship, before we went to Patagonia, there was this like 1 or 2 month period where we were just climbing in the desert all of the time, doing desert towers. I was doing my first crack climbs. I was climbing in Zion for the first time, which is now where I live for people who don't know me. It's a very special place for me. And, you know, it was a really beautiful time. It was this feeling of like rapid progression, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to when you have these breakthroughs in your own climbing. And my relationship with climbing has always been very, very deep. I have been doing it my entire life, basically, and it's always been my number one, no matter what. I've never wavered. I've never lost the psych, and I don't know what is wrong with me for that, because I feel like most people go through, a bit of a like ebb and flow, but mine has just always been turned up to 100 no matter what. It has not ebbed at all. And so I think back then, I was psyched on the comp climbing, but I abandoned my team. I was the coach for the Utah State climbing team at the time. And I totally just left, right? I took this leave of absence from school. I left the competitive climbing world behind just on this chance to explore trad and alpine climbing at a higher level. And so I do look back on it with some fondness, for sure. There were definitely things that we did together that were really fun. But it also was slightly tainted. Like when I go back to some of those places now, like Moab and Zion, there are still climbs that I associate pretty strongly with him because they're things that we did together. And so I've kind of had to like reclaim those places for myself a bit to make new memories and not have them be associated with any negativity. But he started to really negatively influence my climbing by the end of the relationship because of the belittling. There's this one scene at the very end where we're in City of Rocks, which is my favorite place ever. And I was trying this trad route, and I was very ill at the time, and I wasn't able to send it, and I was like taking on every piece, and he and the people at the bottom were making fun of me basically the whole time, like, you should be able to do that, it's not that hard, which is so not helpful. And looking back now, it's just strange to me. Like, I don't hang out with people who behave that way when someone is struggling. If you're trying hard, that's great. Whatever experience you have on a climb, it is what it is. It doesn't need other people's judgments projected onto it. And so that was something I had to recover from, was kind of fixing my own relationship with climbing after that and not having it be wrapped up in his judgments or negativity, and being able to still just enjoy it for myself and not feel like I was being perceived as weak or incompetent or anything else. I had to kind of get my confidence back. And I never stopped loving climbing through it, but it definitely had this like dark undertone to it because of him that I had to forcibly remove so that I could have a nice time all the time again.
Yeah, I recall that scene, that story of you at City Rocks there doing that. It was like a classic climb, and yeah, you were not healthy. But what really struck me was that like massive red flag of like people making fun of a climber who's just like out trying hard and struggling, and that's kind of like what we all do. I mean, obviously, up to this point, Dan had about 7,000 red flags, but like whoever those others were, it's like, what are you doing, people? Random people at the crag, like, giving somebody a hard time. So, I can understand coming off of that feeling, just a huge lack of confidence and not enjoying the act of climbing. And then that, if I recall, didn't you leave there and that was like dovetailed into this like insane 24-hour window that culminated in the end of the relationship? I mean, was that the one where you guys got pulled over and then he was like smashing the windows in that? Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah, it was actually like a week later, but yeah, it was all pretty much back to back. I think we might have gone to Indian Creek briefly in between that trip to City of Rocks and that final night. But then I ended up back at City of Rocks at the very end. That's where I went after I escaped. So within like a 1 or 2 week period, there was a lot going on, a lot of travel and a lot of really high intensity experiences.
Yeah. And it's such an intense, those chapters there towards the end are pretty intense, and maybe we don't have to go through everything in like super detail, but I do think just for purposes of understanding where you were at as a person when you finally did manage to escape this controlling abusive relationship, could you talk us through a little bit about what that last few hours, that last kind of night was like as you all were driving back towards, I think you were driving to pick up some more drugs or something like that for him? Yeah. So he had just done his first base jump at the Perrin Bridge in Idaho, and we were driving home, and long story short, he'd gotten involved with some police who found his like weed pipe and some weed, and he was very upset about it and blamed me basically, even though I'd been asleep. It's a long story, but that's kind of the short version. And he completely lost it and just freaked out and said that his life was over and it was my fault. And he played this game with me where he was going to crash the truck into the median barrier of the interstate if I didn't answer his questions correctly. And the questions were targeted at me to make me take the blame for things in his life going wrong, essentially. And so I had to answer correctly and basically take
the blame or tell him that it was all my fault for these things going wrong. And if I didn't do it fast enough, he would have like crashed into the median barrier and he was trying to kill us both. And so there was this very intense experience that happened on the interstate. And then there are a few other things that happened that night, and it ended, with him saying he was going to kill himself at his parents' house. And I ended up having to call the police and basically run for my life because he was chasing me. So it's a really dark chapter. It's a really intense thing to relive or to read. But in that moment, I had been worn down so much, just, over months of dealing with him and being subjected to his abuse and control. I had lost so much of my identity and my autonomy. And I kind of just felt like this shell of a person. I was very physically ill. I was mentally not doing well because I felt stuck in this relationship. And I had lost everything. At that point, I wasn't in college anymore. I had been isolated from most of my friends and family. Since I wasn't feeling well physically, I also wasn't climbing very well. And the person that was supposed to be my partner was my least safe place, right? Like the most unsafe place for me. And so I felt very lost. I was 20 years old and I felt like I had nothing and no one and nowhere to go. And so on this final night, it was almost like I finally just reached this breaking point where I had nothing else to lose. And it was kind of like, if I don't get out right now, he's going to kill me. And so I had to make this decision that a lot of women, or just, victims in general, have to make, where you either get out or that's it, right? It's over for you. And so I'm lucky that I was able to finally escape and not go back to him or not have him find me after that. Yeah, it was very hard to find that kind of like courage to leave when you are faced with this huge looming danger and this very unpredictable person and you're so exhausted. It's really challenging, but I finally just had to make that choice for myself, and I'm glad that I did, and it didn't go on any longer. But yeah, a lot of people sadly don't get out of that cycle, and so that's part of why I wanted to write this book, is to show people the cycle so they can recognize it sooner and hopefully get out sooner if it's something that they're in or if they see someone else is in.
Yeah. Beautiful, tragic and beautiful, and thank you for doing it. It's just a huge courageous move to be able to put yourself out in this way like you have. And I jotted down a quote that I think is relatable to what we were just talking about here that you wrote towards the end of the book there. You said, quote, "By the end, I felt like a brainwashed zombie. No wonder so many people lack the capacity to leave situations like this. They need a tremendous amount of help," end quote. And clearly you had been put through a lot, and feeling brainwashed and like a zombie is understandable after experiencing somewhat with you, what you went through as I read this book. But you note the tremendous amount of help there, and who helped you? How did you, in those later moments of the relationship, and then certainly after that night, that pivotal night that we were just talking about, who were the people, or what were the things in your life that helped you to actually stay out of that relationship?
Yeah. One of the really interesting things is that prior to finally leaving him for good, I had tried to leave him multiple times that spring. And one of the times that I had left him, I had posted on Facebook some of the things that he had called me and some of the insults he had said to me. I'm not sure why I felt compelled to do that at the time. Maybe it was just some way to take control of the situation and show people a small amount of like what I had just been through. I don't know. But after I had posted that, I got this amazing response from quite a few people who reached out to me and were like, "This is unacceptable. I'm so sorry you went through this," or "Can I beat that guy up?" The whole range of responses. And even though I went back to him after that, again, foolishly, it had shown me that there were people who understood what was going on and were there for me and supportive, and they understood how dark and twisted everything had become. And that was really helpful. And then a couple of really close friends, actually a couple of the people that like the book is dedicated to, were there for me and helped me see that it would be okay. But ultimately, like the act of getting out was something I had to do on my own, and it would have been much easier if I had had help externally. But after I got out, I was able to get help from some friends and talk to my family and repair those relationships. And then there's also a really great organization where I was living at the time in Logan, Utah, called CAPSA, that has like a women's shelter, and it provides free therapy and other services to victims of domestic violence and other things. And they were instrumental in helping me get my life back together with therapy and like a support group and things like that. because I was dealing with pretty severe PTSD at the time, which I'm really grateful now I don't have to deal with. The fact that I can even have this conversation is actually kind of crazy, because 8 years ago when I got out, I couldn't even talk about it without just sobbing and shaking. And so there's been a lot of healing that's happened that's allowed me to be able to write and talk about the experience.
Incredible. That's so amazing. And congratulations on being able to go through that journey, and then to be able to write the book and now talk about it. It's amazing. I spoke with Beth Rodden when her book came out. This was maybe a year ago.
So good. I love her book. Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's so good. And similarly, when we were exploring the situation when they were abducted in Kyrgyzstan and the trauma that came from that, and her sharing how it was so much harder for her to process than it was for Tommy, and just the way her experience with it and her brain processed it different than not just Tommy's, but maybe a man's brain would. It was very kind of eye-opening to me, because I had read Tommy's book first, The Push, and then when Beth's book came out, I read that, and we talked about it, and like they felt like two very different accounts of, maybe not different facts, like the situation was that, but like what happened after was very different. Tommy was like, used it to be able to climb harder than he'd ever done, and Beth was like paralyzed by it. And it just underscores, although those are just two individuals, it underscores how women and men, may process trauma in very different ways. I don't know. I'm curious. I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but it sounds like you've read the book as well. So I don't know. Does that
both, yeah.
Resonate with you as well?
Yeah, it was really interesting reading Beth's story. And I mean, a lot of other climbers who have been through difficult things, like reading Katie Brown's book was also really powerful for me. We all cope with things differently and deal with things differently. And what they went through is certainly traumatic in a very different way. I think, the kind of like prolonged abuse that I had to deal with from someone who was supposed to be trusted, right? It's going to manifest in a very different way than kind of a shorter, more intense experience from a complete stranger or group of strangers, I guess, in their case. But ultimately, right, like it's just insidious for all of us, and we all just have to figure out how to deal with it in our own way. So I'm glad that Beth was able to deal with that in her own way and write the book, and it seems like she's doing well now, which is incredible. I love following her. She's such an inspiration to me. I grew up with a poster of her on my wall, actually. She's amazing. So incredible. So, yeah.
Yeah, that healing that can happen, and sometimes it takes many years. Sometimes it's never a complete process. I'm sure it's actually never a complete process, because we're all just works in progress here. But for you've come such a far way, and we don't have to explore much of this in any detail that makes you uncomfortable. But when you look back on the healing process, what stands out for you as kind of the more effective tools or resources or processes that you went through in order to reflect on and ultimately process the trauma and then try to move past it?
What therapies end up being effective is going to be different maybe for everybody, but for me, at least, EMDR was really helpful. I found a therapist that did EMDR therapy for me, which I was quite skeptical of at first. I have a science background. I'm a geologist, and I was a science teacher and everything, and I tend to be very objective and reasonable about things. And I saw that it was evidence-based, so I went in with an open mind, and even though it seemed quite strange. Are you familiar with EMDR at all?
Yeah, I would love for you to explain it for the audience. I mean, my understanding of it, although I've never experienced it myself, but my wife has, is either with the movement of the eyes or like kind of using these like tapping type like paddles or something like that. But you know more about it than I do, so yeah, I'll let you explain.
Yeah, I don't know all of the kind of like theory behind it necessarily, or even all the correct terminology. I'm not a therapist, so I apologize to anyone listening. Hopefully you won't roll your eyes at me, but essentially it's this like bilateral stimulation. So it can either be like, moving the eyes back and forth, or having an auditory stimulus on each side, like alternating in each ear, or tapping or holding buzzers in each hand. And the therapist walks you through a very specific process to help you kind of make sense of different things or decide how you want to, the way you're currently experiencing it when you think of a certain memory or idea, and then what you want to be able to think about it. Essentially, they help you kind of like reprocess or reframe something. I'm not even still sure entirely how it works. I just had to trust in the process, and the therapist I had did a great job and ended up essentially curing me of my PTSD in terms of like the clinical presentation and diagnostic criteria of it, which was remarkable.
Wow.
I'm glad I went into it with an open mind, because talk therapy, though it was helpful, it didn't get rid of the hypervigilance and the nightmares and, those kinds of things, whereas the MDR somehow did. So I was very grateful to go through that experience over a number of months, and I haven't needed anything for it since then. But in terms of some of the other like thanks, yeah, I was very grateful to experience that. I know that's not the case for everyone, but it was very effective for me. The other two main things that were helpful for me, one is Stoic philosophy, which if anyone follows me, they know I'm insane about Stoicism. It's like my whole life. I would actually consider myself like a student of Stoicism before I would even consider myself a climber, in terms of like things that are important to me or like ways that I identify, because I can't always be out climbing, but I can always use Stoicism to like inform my life. That philosophy is such an incredible framework for facing challenges and for kind of the way that you approach problems and the way that you view yourself in light of problems and challenges. So being able to recognize that I can't control other people's behavior. So in this case, Dan, he was struggling with things that were outside of my control. And I eventually had to make the choice to like reclaim my own autonomy, which is a huge principle in Stoic philosophy, is recognizing your own independence and protecting that. And so being able to kind of like separate myself from him and not make myself feel guilty for what happened was really helpful, because it allowed me to take control of my own life and kind of rebuild my life after I had been this brainwashed zombie, right? I felt like I had nothing, to the point where I am now, where I've kind of honestly like achieved most of my dreams, which is crazy to say. And I love the person that I've become, and I can credit almost all of that to Stoic philosophy. So like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, such a powerful framework to work within. And then one of the other big ones is actually something else a therapist recommended to me, which is mindful self-compassion. Just this, like being able to hold space for yourself and give yourself grace and be compassionate towards yourself when you're dealing with health issues or, dealing with PTSD or anything like that. It's really powerful. So those three things, I think, in conjunction were the biggest for my healing journey, and just continuing to like go climbing and growing as a person and having like healthy relationships to show myself like, okay, there are normal, trustworthy, great, loving people out there that aren't going to abuse me or manipulate me. That in itself, I think, is very healing, because it shows you like, okay, I don't have to worry about every relationship being a repeat of this gnarly experience, right? Like there are really good people out there. I can have positive relationships. So that was also helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to explore, kind of more current now, post the relationship with Dan. And for the listener, they may or may not know, but Dan did end up dying, took his own life, and that was some years after, I believe, after you got out. So he was still in the world. Yeah, it was actually
just earlier this year.
Oh, was it really just this year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you want to know something
that's
weird?
Right, because you noted it was when it was on the same day that you got notice about your book being published. Is that right?
Yeah, it was the freakiest thing, Ryan. It was crazy. It was like I hadn't heard anything about my book process in like a long time. I had been kind of, occasionally sending out queries, but I was honestly at that point feeling like very down about the whole thing. I was like, I don't know if this book is ever going to get out there. And I was committed to only doing traditional publishing. So I'm at the, whims of publishers. And I had just been waiting for years to get it out there. And I, this one morning, I like walk out of a doctor's appointment randomly, and I see this message from someone I had been working with, actually like a law enforcement officer who had been following him, that he had died. And it totally took me off guard. I was like so out of the blue. And then like 3 hours later, I got the publishing offer for my book. So it was like the weirdest day. Like I hadn't heard any updates on him really in a while or on the book. And then I found out like back to back. And it was like, I'm a really reasonable person. I'm not like superstitious at all, but it did feel like some kind of weird universe timing of just like he needed to be able to like close his chapter for me to like continue mine and not be worried, because he had threatened me when he'd found out about the book, even though I didn't reveal his identity, So that was like in a lot of ways like a huge relief for him, that his suffering could be over, and also so that I wouldn't have to worry about my own safety moving forward with the publishing process. Yeah,
what a powerful few hours. That's like kind of mind-boggling. And for the listener, it was unrelated to the book or anything like that. It sounds like he was being chased by law enforcement or something like that, and he was in a bad situation and ended up, I think it sounds like, killed himself rather than get arrested or something. Is that right?
Yeah, you nailed it. Definitely. He was in a lot of legal trouble. He had really deteriorated like his mental health like full schizophrenia, addiction, just totally not with it, really struggling. He'd even isolated from his family at that point, and everyone knew he was kind of, just really off the deep end. So really
Right.
tragic, honestly, like someone that, when I met him, he wasn't quite that bad yet. He could still pass as a relatively functional person at the time. But by the end, he was really far gone, which is tragic, and never had to get to that point, but he didn't want help. So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fact that you have like such compassion for the situation and even him as a person after all that you've been through really says a lot about you as a person and the work that you've done. And so, yeah, I do want to talk about kind of after you got out and went through some of these therapies that proved to be incredibly helpful, it sounds like. How did has your relationship with climbing and the climbing world, climbing community, people in general, like how is that now after being through something as traumatic as you went through?
Honestly, it's fantastic. I love climbing so much, more than ever. I always joke that I love climbing more every day, which sounds silly because it's already like infinite. But, I don't know if you've noticed this, like as you've started to climb longer and longer, but I feel like every time I go climbing, I still am learning things, and I feel even more like mastery in my movement and my ability to read things and my connection to the movement and to the rock and to the community. Like everything just gets to this like deeper level all the time, and it's so rewarding and so addicting in so many ways. It's the best thing ever. I've never found anything that even comes close, to that feeling. So yeah, I feel really lucky that I love climbing and I'm able to push myself, and I have this great relationship with the climbing community as a coach and a guide, and like I help run the local climbing organization here in St. George. I'm the VP of that, and that's been really cool to like be more involved. But yeah, I think mostly like through my coaching, that's honestly like been one of my favorite things, is to help other people kind of enjoy climbing again after a traumatic experience or dealing with health issues, because those are things that I've dealt with, so that's really rewarding to me because climbing's given me so much, and I want other people to be able to have a positive relationship with it too. So yeah, I feel really lucky that I have a great relationship with climbing now. It's hard with chronic illness stuff and medical things going on. It can be limiting sometimes, but it does not like make it negative for me at all, if that makes sense. I still enjoy it just as much.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a bit, because you do touch on that in the book as well. For a good period of time, you were feeling terrible and didn't know why you were feeling terrible, and now you have much better understanding. And so can you share with us, to the extent that you're comfortable, what these chronic conditions are that you've been having to manage and struggling with?
Yeah, I'm very comfortable sharing about all this stuff. I've kind of positioned myself as an advocate, so I've been able to kind of get over myself and any shyness I have about it. I'm just like willing to talk about all this stuff. I'm like, my life is so public at this point, especially with this book coming out. I'm like,
right.
Yeah, people are seeing everything. I'm like, I have no room for like privacy anymore, which I've happily opted into, because if it can help other people, then that's great, But yeah, the chronic health stuff has been a huge challenge actually for like my entire life. I have a genetic connective tissue disorder called HEDS, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And that one causes a lot of like joint instability and widespread pain and other issues with any collagen-based tissues. But it also predisposed me to like developing POTS, which is a form of dysautonomia. And that causes a lot of issues with things that are supposed to be controlled by the autonomic nervous system, things like blood pressure, heart rate, body temperature, sleep, digestion, all kinds of things. The main thing with POTS is that you feel lightheaded often, and I also have this like heat intolerance from it and stuff. I used to faint from it a lot, but I have that under control mostly at this point. I know my triggers, I manage really well. And then I have something called mast cell activation syndrome, which is related to like allergies and immune responses. So yeah, I just have a lot of food allergies. I'm allergic to pets and plants and molds and all kinds of stuff. My body's just essentially very sensitive. But I have that managed well too. I'm able to avoid triggers really well. And then I have an autoimmune condition called lupus. So those four together are kind of like my main issues. The first three are actually all connected. There's a lot of research going into them right now, because a lot of people who have one tend to have the other two. So they kind of call it like the trifecta sometimes. And so they're all interrelated. So it sounds like a lot, but it's really almost kind of like two conditions. It's like the trifecta and then lupus, which they kind of feed into each other. Like when the lupus is worse, my POTS gets worse. And, it's all kind of this weird little connected web. And it took a very long time to figure out what was wrong with me. As you can imagine, there's all these different body systems involved. You get handed off to all these different doctors, blood tests, scans, like you're just like a test, like guinea pig for years, which was very frustrating, especially as an athlete. You're like, I just want to be able to perform. I want to go climb. I want to feel good. So the book kind of touches on the beginning of that whole experience of like, what is going wrong with me? I feel like I'm going crazy. And I'm sure it was not helped by the extreme emotional distress I was under at the time, right? Like that's definitely a component to it, but there's other physiological things that work in my body as well. So yeah, it's been a long journey trying to sort all of that out. And I'm very grateful I have answers now so I can, support my body and see what like the limits are for someone like me in climbing. I don't know a lot of other climbers that are pushing themselves who deal with all of these things. I have been able to connect with a lot of really cool people on Instagram who deal with some of the same conditions, which is great. But I really am committed to like figuring out what the limits are for someone in a body like mine. That's one of my main goals in climbing.
Yeah, I interviewed a climber a couple years ago, Favia Dubeck. Do you know Favia?
Yeah, I think she has HEDS as well, right?
She does, yeah. And that's the first time I had heard of that. And as a result, she basically decided to specialize in low ball bouldering because she couldn't take high falls just because of the hypermobility and the connective tissue. And I think she had another complicating issue with her hip or her back. But she's like super strong and out there having fun and just kind of found her way of doing it. Have you had to rethink, anything about your climbing with regard to the conditions that you have or, anything else, I guess, lifestyle choices? Because you've been very psyched, as you talk about and as we see in the book, very psyched on like working up through the crack climbing grades and traditional climbing, and that can be a little bit more of a bold style of climbing. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I suppose. But yeah, what style of climbing, I guess, are you most excited about and most able to pursue now?
Yeah, I am mostly psyched on sport multi-pitch, especially trying to do like first free ascents. So my main project right now in St. George is a long-standing open project. The fourth pitch has never been sent before, and I got really close this spring, and I think it's going to go down this fall if my body cooperates, which is really exciting. But yeah, I love sport multi-pitch. I think it's so fun. And then also just any like cool single pitch climbing, whether it's sport or trad, I don't care. If it's an inspiring line that I'm excited about, then I'll do it. I have to kind of avoid sustained jamming with crack climbing at this point with my HEDS. My joints are really struggling last few years in particular. And so if I do trad projects, they tend to be more like sporty movement or a variety of crack sizes, protected by gear, of course, but more sporty movement than just like a sustained splitter crack. It just hurts so bad. Like the torque on your joints, and the stretch it puts on like my ligaments and stuff is just horrendous. And it will take me like weeks to recover from something like that. So I have to be quite careful with my volume of crack climbing. So as much as I love trad, I have to be really selective with the routes and terrain that I choose. And that's part of why I love City of Rocks in Idaho, actually, is that it doesn't tend to have a lot of like splitter cracks like that. It's more of like a sporty, weird combo of different features. And so I really like that about it. It's like this cool puzzle, and it's not as bad on my joints. It's a little bit more like technical, which I really enjoy. So just being able to like dance on my feet. I don't like caves or overhangs at all. It's so hard on my shoulders. So I avoid that as much as I can. So yeah, there's definitely some medically informed choices to my climbing style, certainly.
I'm thinking now you're thinking multi-pitch sport. What's the one that Anna did up in like Upper Tuolumne? She continued the line of peace.
Love.
Yeah. Peace and love. That looks like an epic climb.
It does. It looks amazing. I've watched all of her videos of that, and it just looks so cool. I'm like, oh my gosh, her fingers are so strong, and her footwork is so incredible. It's so amazing to watch what she's able to do up there. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. Just being able to climb all day. That's why I've spent so much time in Potrero Chico in Mexico, because it's just like sport climbing multi-pitch heaven. You can just run and have like a 25-pitch day and cover so much terrain. And it's so like mindless in some ways because it's sport instead of trad. It's not like you have to think about the rack or anything. You can just like take off like a rocket and just blow through a ton of pitches and simul climb and do whatever and swing leads. So I love Potrero for that reason. And there's some of that locally where I live too, which is nice. So yeah, this particular project I'm working on though, it's only like 5 pitches, and it only has the one really, really hard pitch. So I'm excited about that. And then I'll probably move on to some other like single pitch projects this season, I think. But my partner's really psyched on freeing this big wall in Zion. So I might get roped into that a little bit this fall too. We'll see how it goes.
Sick. Man, you're really selling me on the sport climbing multi-pitch. I don't know. Oh, I did one out in Smith Rock. There's probably others that I've done, but I know there's some big ones around. I mean, Potrero, I talked to Luke Mihal not too long ago, and he's like, you got to get down to Potrero. So I'll try to make it down there at some point. That seems like the place to be.
Oh, man, it's so fun. I've been like 4 or 5 times at this point, and for some reason, I just like can't stay away. It's such a fun little community, and so much cool climbing, so techy, but also just like if you love running like moderates all day long, there's like no better place. It's so much fun. I don't know.
Yeah, well, your moderates are not my moderates, but yes is the answer.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go to the Red this winter though for the first time ever instead of Mexico, which feels crazy because I almost always go to Potrero, so I'm like, oh, I'm going to mix it up. But I've never been to the Red, which feels like a crime at this point. To be climbing for over 20 years in the United States and not go to the Red seems insane. So yeah, I was actually just listening to your episode with Sonny, and I was like, oh man, yeah, I got to get out there.
Yes. Oh, that is so great. Well, if you don't love the steep stuff, well, we can still find you some things out here. There's lots of good climbing out here, but of course it is known for like the steeper kind of cave route type climbing. But there's some great trad climbing. There's some great single pitch trad, and there's definitely some more technical kind of Red River Gorge vert kind of in quotes where it's like just slightly overhanging.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and I am really excited to explore that. I'll still do steep climbing, but it's definitely not my like primary focus because of the shoulder issues. But I've had shoulder surgery and ongoing PT for those. Part of the HEDS thing is just constant management of joints. I mean, that's every climber, but it's definitely amplified in someone with connective tissue problems. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, super excited to explore the Red.
I want to kind of circle back a little bit more on some of the themes here from the book. Do you have a sense, just as you look at climbing right now, like what am I missing as the guy that just goes to the gym and then goes out to the crag, that people who are listening, whether they're men or women, and whether they're in a relationship that's, has potential or is abusive or not, like what do you see in the sport of climbing?
Yeah, it's a hard one to answer because I think everyone's in such a unique situation. It's going to present differently, but I'll do my best to like think of some things. My ex in particular was able to hide his issues quite well when we were in public situations, like at the gym or the crag, but there were definitely some things that were strange, right? Like the belittling. Something that I notice a lot is, and I'm using like a heteronormative kind of thing here, where it's typically like a stronger or older male climber with a younger or not as experienced female partner. And I've noticed that a lot of the times the guy will be kind of aggressive towards the girl and like really bossy in terms of like things that they're doing, or like kind of nitpicky about different things like where they're standing to belay, or I don't know, just like micromanaging them, or being really like aggro and yelling beta at them, or just kind of doing weird communication things, when they're climbing. I've witnessed that at the crag quite a bit, where I'm like, ooh, if that's what you guys are doing in public, I don't want to hear how that sounds behind closed doors, like the way that you're communicating is kind of sketchy. Yeah, and then besides that, it can be kind of hard. I mean, you just kind of have to watch people's behavior and see if anybody like looks like really uncomfortable. I think one of the biggest things is just calling people out when they are being, problematic in whatever way. And that's such a like generic sounding statement. It's not that like it seems so vague. But people generally have a pretty good intuition for when stuff is wrong, I feel like, if you're being observant or if you're talking to people and you notice, different things about them seeming like isolated or avoidant, or you witness some kind of like aggressive behavior or really concerning communication happening, or some kind of power dynamic that's being exploited, whether that's online or at the crag in person, I think just like checking in on friends, if you have any like inkling or that little feeling that something is amiss, just check in with people and be real with them and go on like a deeper level, because if you're just like, hey, you good? They're just like, yep. And then if you leave it at that, they're not going to like open up about it. So if you're vulnerable with them, or you just let them know, like if they do feel closed off, just be like, hey, I'm here. I'm a safe person. You can always talk to me and I'm not going to judge you, or I'll help you, with resources or, whatever it might be. that however you're able to like offer assistance to them if you feel like they might be in a bad scenario, then maybe they'll be more likely to come to you when they feel ready, you know, because otherwise they're going to just probably isolate and not tell people what's going on.
I appreciate that. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially if you know someone and you're seeing this. If you don't know someone, if you see kind of the behavior being exhibited at the crag, like you noted there, or when you were at City of Rocks and there were those climbers who were joining in with Dan to belittle you as you were struggling up a climb, is it counterproductive to try to call somebody out in that situation because it'll just like make them angrier and then it'll essentially be, you know, create more of a blowback in the relationship later after there aren't other eyes on the situation? Or is it helpful for that person to hear like, this isn't okay, and it's not okay that you're treating her that way, for example?
Gosh, yeah, that's a hard one because I'm inclined to say like both, right? Like call people out and tell them that it's not cool. But also having been on the receiving end of abuse, I know that, you know, whenever Dan was targeted or felt like called out, that, you know, I would probably end up bearing the brunt of that, if that makes sense. Like he'd take it out on me. And so I think you have to be really like aware of what the scenario is and just use your best judgment. Like I would say err on the side of like calling people out so they know it's not okay, but also recognize in some scenarios that the victim might end up like taking on some of that if there's like a fallout from it. So yeah, it's a really hard thing to give like a blanket statement on. I would just kind of be cautious, and maybe there's like a better way to do it too, where it's not like a public shaming thing. It's like a, you know, afterward, if you have an opportunity to like pull a person aside and check in about something or address some behavior, maybe that's like a more appropriate option that would be less likely to lead to danger for the victim, you know. But it's such a complex thing to navigate, right? There's always gonna be like different dynamics happening at the crag. So yeah, it's a hard thing to give a blanket statement on. I wish I had some advice, but yeah, just checking in with people and not tolerating any BS, I think, is like some of the biggest things.
Yeah, don't be jerks, people. Like just be cool, be supportive, be caring, be understanding. And fortunately, although there still seems to be quite a bit of an imbalance, but fortunately now compared to maybe 10 years ago and certainly 20 years ago, there do seem to be more women who are climbing and climbing in groups of women. And so maybe there's a little bit less of a risk of an abusive power dynamic relationship coming in just out of necessity, which sounds like for you in your situation, part of what originally kind of kept you tethered to this relationship with Dan was that you just wanted to be climbing. You were so psyched on climbing that you were essentially willing to endanger yourself to some extent just so that you could go get climbing. And perhaps now that won't be as much of an issue if somebody can just find better, healthier climbing partners to be out with.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Having more women mentors is a huge part of it. Certainly. Like if I had someone else to take me under their wing, especially a woman or a safer man, then that would have been, you know, an obvious solution to that. So I wouldn't have felt so tethered perhaps. But also I feel like when you're in that, you also are closing yourself off to those opportunities, even if they do exist. And so it's a little bit challenging. You know, these guys are going to use that as one way to manipulate you, so you won't see those other opportunities necessarily. So I think there definitely is still a risk for this happening, whichever way the gender dynamic goes, you know. Like I said, it typically tends to be the guy doing that, but it certainly can be the other way around too. So I don't want to only talk about it in that sense, if that makes sense. But I think one of the biggest things is just like, yeah, having more female mentors out there and knowing that there's like other options available to learn. You don't have to put yourself in some kind of sketchy situation just for climbing mentorship purposes, you know, or for opportunities to progress. Yeah, we'll see, I guess, how that changes in the coming years as it becomes even more like gender balanced. But it definitely is better now than it used to be. So progress.
With your story coming out in a public way, and it's been, I mean, it'll be out in a much bigger way this fall here as the book actually is released, but you've done some podcast interviews and written about it and spoken about it yourself. And so there's people who are aware of what you've been through. Have women reached out to you and shared this experience with you or come to you for help? Is there anything happening, you know, kind of within climbing or outside of climbing that you feel we still have a lot of work to do in order to make sure people are protected?
Yeah, I've had a number of people reach out to me, actually. Some people who told me, like, this helped me recognize red flags in my own relationship, like, thanks for opening my eyes. I've had some people who reached out that were also victims of Dan specifically. Even though I didn't mention him when I was on the Enormocast years ago, people put the pieces together because he outed himself on his social media at the time. It was a whole thing. And so some of these women reached out to me, which was really hard to hear. Like, it made me feel guilty at the time of like, wow, I should have pressed charges against him because maybe it could have prevented these other victims, you know, like they wouldn't have had to suffer under him as well. So that was kind of a hard reckoning to have with myself, and I don't hold that against myself anymore, especially now that he's gone and since I've talked to those women. And then I've had other people reach out to me just in general too, like, you know, thank you for speaking up about this and being vulnerable about it, because it's something that's often just brushed under the rug in this community. You know, it's interesting, I'm sure you've seen this in the comments sections on Instagram, but when you kind of traverse this more challenging or controversial terrain in the climbing world, there's a lot of people who will comment and just be like, well, just focus on rock climbing, and, you know, we don't need to talk about politics. We don't need to talk about XYZ. It's really weird that there's this like resistance to that sometimes in the climbing world, and it seems to usually be men in those comments, unfortunately, who almost want to be like willingly blind to some of the problems in the climbing community. So that's kind of strange to me. But I have had a lot of people reach out in support and say that they're glad that this is being discussed. You know, my story might be an extreme example, but I do think on a smaller level, there are a lot of power dynamics that exist in climbing relationships, whether they're romantic or not, that can be exploited. And there is certainly like controlling relationships outside of the climbing community too. So I hope that this story can like help reach people in and out of the climbing community.
Yeah, well, I know it will. I mean, it really impacted me. Like, it had such an effect on me when I read it, and I just recommend everybody who's listening to grab a copy of the book. We'll put a link in there for the pre-order. And yeah, thank you for doing it. I mean, it's just, what a journey. Fallon, what a journey that you've been on, and you're like so young. What the hell are you going to do for the next 50 years?
Hopefully climb, man. I just love climbing. And thanks for the kind words. Yeah, I want to write more books, and I want to just keep climbing and pushing myself. You know, it's weird, as someone who's always wanted to be an author, I never thought my first book would be something quite like this, you know, but it is what it is, and it's my story, and I'm not ashamed of it. But as the like official release approaches, it has been kind of nerve-wracking, being like, oh my God, all these people are going to read this book that I wrote that's about when I was 19 years old, and I tried to be honest, you know, from the mindset of when I was a teenager, which is so vulnerable. Like, oh, I hope people realize it's not the person I am anymore. I feel like such an idiot. So it's a little bit scary to put that out into the world. But I hope when people read the afterword, they'll see at least some of the progress that I've made, and they'll recognize that I'm not that young, foolish girl anymore. Not that, you know, I want to judge her, but it is what it is. And I tried to write it true to the time period. So
yeah. Well, I mean, we're all foolish when we're young. That's one of the best parts about being young, is that we get to be foolish, and it's kind of a necessary part to learn how to grow. And to the people who will leave the comments who want climbing to just be about climbing, they're probably not listening to this right now. But if you are listening to this right now, you know, climbing is a lifestyle. It's not just a sport. We're not just talking about a game here. We often define ourselves as climbers, you know, in maybe the first couple of things that we think about. It is a lifestyle. And so as it pertains to life, we can talk and should talk about all of these other things. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to, you know, remove the blinders, or to face failures or our own kind of inadequacies as people or as a society, but it's only going to make us better. And the more we can just like have a dialogue around it, I think is just only going to be a benefit to not just climbing, but the community and just all of us as people anyway. And so thank you, Fallon, for helping us by putting this book out there and sharing your story out there. I want to ask you about the tattoos on your wrist.
Okay.
You got tattoos on your wrist.
That was very well said, by the way. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I have 2 tattoos on my wrist. What did you want to ask about them?
Share them with us.
Okay, yeah, they're like just a word on each wrist. They're both principles from Stoic philosophy, and I got them as reminders. That's why they're on my wrist, because it's something you see all the time. So one says autonomy, and one says autarkia. Autonomy is probably a word most people are going to be familiar with, whereas the other one is not. So autonomy, right, is of course this idea of like self-governance and independence and being able to make your own decisions and live your own life. And I got that one as a reminder that I will never let someone control me again, because Dan had full control of my life and I'd totally lost my own identity. And as someone who follows or tries to follow, right, Stoic philosophy, living true to your own nature is one of the like main concepts. And so if you've lost your autonomy, it's impossible to do that. So I try to live my life in a way now that I take full responsibility for, and I stand behind my actions and my words and how I show up for myself. So that's one of them. And then on my other wrist, I have autarkia, which is a concept that it kind of can be summarized by the phrase self-reliance, but it's not in like the I don't need anybody's help like toxic kind of way. It's almost this like idea of contentedness with what you have. Like what I have is enough, who I am is enough, my place in the world is enough, and I can rely on myself to get through anything that I need to get through. So that one is helpful as well, like in terms of facing obstacles and just like a reminder of I can figure this out and what I have is enough. Like I don't need to be greedy for more or feel like I have been, given the short stick or something. Like my life is fine how it is, and you can like keep striving for more, but you can also be content with what you have. So those are my 2 wrist tattoos. And then I have, that. Marcus Aurelius, of course, on my forearm, which is fun. He's like my right-hand man. Yeah, my little reminder, like he's always watching me and there to consult with, like what would he do? So yeah, Stoic philosophy is so helpful for me.
I've got a duck tattooed on my wrist that just, her name's Happy and she makes me happy. But now I'm feeling like I need to have some like hard to pronounce words.
I don't know about that. What's the idea with the duck? Tell me about that.
I just love ducks and they make me happy, and I just wanted a little reminder it's kind of a reminder to, like when I'm en route, it's a little bit of a reminder to just like breathe and smile, like just, it's fine. Like just, there's a duck. Look, the duck is just telling you to just, have fun, relax. And just in my everyday life, like it's very stressful. I'm in a very stressful part of life with like the kids and the parents and the jobs and all this stuff. And so it's just like a little kind of reminder here and there during the day to just take a deep breath and smile.
Oh, that's so cute. I love that. I actually tell my clients all the time to come up with some kind of like visual cue to help them if they're dealing with fear or doubt, like while climbing, because it can be like a really good way to like get out of your head. Like if you have something written on like your hand or your wrist that you'll see while you're climbing to help you remember some kind of grounding technique or to breathe. So that's genius. You're doing it. I'm glad that you have that.
That's great. Yeah, it's really hard to like be angry when you're looking at a duck. I mean, the ducks are just, they're just so pure, they're just so purely joyful. So at least for me, I mean, it's just, everybody's got their own little thing, like you said. That's great. Well, you mentioned,
thanks for sharing that. That's cute.
What if people want to get in touch with you or work with you or get a copy of your book or read any of your other writing? I will note also that you put some like really wonderful poetry in this book, in Pay No Mind, as well as the chapter names I thought were like very creative and interesting. I mean, the whole thing, just the way you've laid it out is, I think, really creative and engaging. So congratulations on that. So for anybody who wants
Thank you.
Whether it's the book or anything else that you're doing, how do people follow you or find you?
Yeah, my Instagram is Fallon Climbs. It looks like Fall on Climbs, which is always really funny when people meet me in real life, like at the crag. They recognize me and then they don't realize my name is Fallon. That's always really funny. But yeah, Fall on Climbs. And then that has like a link tree with links to all of my stuff. My book, Pay No Mind, is available for pre-order from D'Angelo Publications. So pre-ordering on their website is the best way to do it. It's better for the publisher and for me if you do it that way instead of through like Amazon or something. Cool. So that link's on there, as well as link to my personal website, which has some info about my coaching and everything else, like all my writing and all that good stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to read my book and for all of the really, really kind words about the way that I laid it out. John Long actually is the one who helped the most with the chapter titles, which is kind of funny. I was just going to have them be numbered, like not have individual titles. And he's like, nah, we got to like come up with a cool chapter title for every single one. So we put a lot of effort into that. So I'm glad that you noticed. That's cool.
Oh, let's talk about that for a second, because John Long wrote the foreword and it's awesome. Like it's classic John Long, fantastically written forward. But also you did he mentor you as part of the writing process?
He did. Yeah, we worked together for a few months this spring to revise the entire book. So it was it was such a cool opportunity. I mean, like I said, I've been climbing my whole life. So when I was a little kid, I looked up to him and all of the stone masters, all of the pros, like they were gods in my eyes. And so when I found out that the publisher was linking me up with him for this process, I was really shocked. And it all happened that same day I found out that Dan was dead and I got the publishing offer. I met with John for the first time that night. So
what?
They moved so fast. They're like, yeah, you're going to meet with him like now. I was like, okay. So that was a crazy day of my life. I was like, and I just met John Long. Okay. But now it's like, we worked together for months and we're just friends now, which is cool. And they always are like, don't meet your heroes. But I'm happy to say with John, he's an amazing human being. So I got really lucky on that one. So understanding, such an incredible writer, really helpful with the writing process. Just, no bullshit, just immediately like helping to improve everything and find flaws or find weak points or figure out things that would be helpful to add. He had me read the entire book out loud to him over video calls, and then we would, make changes, and he'd encourage me to, use different writing strategies. So yeah, really powerful experience to get to work with him on that. And I mean, what a crazy opportunity, like for my first book to have gotten to work on it with him was just a dream come true. I never could have even imagined. So yeah, really, really grateful he wrote the foreword, and he's been so helpful and supportive through the whole thing, which is really cool. He had a surprising number of insights, like he's been through abuse and addiction and obviously is like a very competent climber. So he was the perfect person for it, which was just, so cool. I still feel like giddy even just talking about it.
Oh, it's just wild. I mean, the forward was beautiful, but then to hear about the process, the collaborative process that you had with him to help bring this story of yours out to the world, to climbers and beyond, really rad. Well, again, congratulations and good luck with the press tour. Stay hydrated.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for putting a piece of yourself out there in this way. It just takes a lot of courage, but as you noted, I think in maybe it was the kind of the afterword in the book, if just one person reads it and finds some help in a situation that they're in, then it'll have been worth it. And I think it's going to be a lot more than that. So really, thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the opportunity to be on this. I've listened to The Struggle for a long time, and yeah, it feels really cool. I was like, man, Chris Sharma was just on this thing. Like, this is crazy to be on here. So yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's cool to get to chat with you.
All right, y'all, that wraps things up on this conversation here with Fallon. Ooh, what an emotional journey we all just went on. Thank you for listening through to the end. I hope you feel good about where Fallon's at right now. She's crushing it. She's really loving climbing and life and has found incredible tools to deal with the trauma that happened to her. And hopefully her story serves not just as a cautionary tale, but also as an inspiring one. So take care of each other out there. Take care of yourself. Take care of your friends, your partners, your belaytionships and relationships. And there's plenty of resources out there if you're recognizing any kinds of these red flags that Fallon touched on, whether it's in your own relationship or somebody else in your life. Definitely seek some of those resources. And of course, I think you can feel free to reach out to Fallon directly on Instagram. She's pretty active on Instagram. And I also encourage you to support Fallon and also just dive deeper into the story by picking up a copy of her incredible book. It's called Pay No Mind. There's a link in your show notes to go directly to the publisher, where that's better for the publisher and better for Fallon instead of like buying it on Amazon or whatever. It's only $20 for the book. I have a copy already. I got an advanced copy, but I also bought a copy because I really want the one with that nice, beautiful cover on it, and also to support Fallon. And also, the book's amazing. As she said, she worked with John Long on it. There's poetry in there. Chapters are amazing. And then we barely scratched the surface in this conversation. So if you really want to go on that full journey, then grab a copy of that book and let me know what you think of it. I'd love to hear from you. Little struggle book club going on. What else is going on with the struggle? Well, I'm going to be part of Rocktoberfest again this year. So if you're going to be in Kentucky for Rocktoberfest, man, it's a good time. Clinics, parties, amazing climbing, and I'm going to be kicking it all off on the Wednesday of Rocktoberfest with a live podcast at Miguel's, and the lineup is banger. We've got our friends Anna Hazelnut, Emily Harrington, and Kai Leitner coming in for a live podcast with me. Oh my gosh, you guys, grab a slice of pizza, grab a beer. We're going to do a raffle. Come say hi to those incredible pro athletes, and while you're at it, say hi to me. I'll just be lurking in the corner there with a microphone. Come give me a high five. So you can learn more about that over at the RRGCC website and on their Instagram. Just keep an eye on my Instagram. I'll be linking a bunch of stuff to it soon. And otherwise, still a little warm out here in Kentucky, but the cool temps are coming. So I'm getting out. I'm climbing as much as I can. I hope you're climbing as much as you can as well, indoors or out. It's all good. It's all fun. And I really, really, really appreciate your support. And if you do want to support me directly, you can swing over to Patreon. Got a lot of cool bonus stuff over there. Actually, I'm going to release a bonus episode this week because I don't have a bonus episode with Fallon. I've got a bonus episode from when I was a guest on the Runout with Andrew and Chris, where we did a movie review of The Sound. And our good buddy Alex Honnold popped in. I shot him a text just as we were sitting down to record. I said, hey, we're talking about this movie. Do you think you could pop on? And lo and behold, what a solid dude. Alex popped on. And so we talked about this fantastically bad movie called The Sound and had a blast with it. So anyway, that'll be up on my Patreon. You can swing over there. There's a free trial or whatever. You can learn all about it over on patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show. And you can tune into that bonus episode and access like 100 hours of other really good stuff over there. And then I just want to give a shout out to the people who make the struggle happen. Glenn Walker, who helps me to edit these episodes. Oh, do you hear my alarm going off? That's my alarm telling me I need to go bring lunch to my son at his school because it's like parents bring lunch to their kid day. So let's just wrap this up here. Shout out to the people who helped make the podcast happen. Shout out to the Honnold Foundation for keeping the podcast carbon neutral. And shout out to you for listening. You are friggin' awesome. I'm inspired by you every day. I love to hear from you. I hope you are having a beautiful season. And I can't wait to talk to you soon and see you next week on the next podcast. All right, gotta go. See ya.